Thanks very much, Rahul, for the introduction, and thanks to APAC Med for having us all here. This is as inspiring a panel as it gets to talk about AI. I think we were given a brief glimpse of some of the ideas in the previous session, and then I think some of the intros to this session also covered some of the ideas. So I think people are dying to know a little bit more and talk a little bit deeper about that. We'll keep this session pacey. I can see the clock counter there, so we'll go through it fast and really focus on the insights that we can get from the panelists. We'll talk, opportunities broadly, opportunities, India, and then challenges. We just keep that as the flow, so it's easy for people to follow. So let's just start. I think I just want to start by the sort of first open-ended question, which is where are each of you seeing the biggest opportunities from AI in the MedTech and healthcare space broadly, from each of your vantage points? Maybe we'll just go in this order for this one.
Well, thanks for the question. And I do have to tell you, you heard a lot about AI and a lot about digital, and I'm an engineer by trade, by the way. Make no mistake, this is the most exciting time in MedTech. We will actually see with AI, we will see advancements faster that will be measurable and will have a positive impact on our healthcare population. And that is wildly exciting. Now, you have to do it right, and you have to do it careful. Now, with that said, I work at a very big multinational company, sells $22 billion US a year worth, and I could talk to you about AI, and I could talk to you about the patient room, I could talk to you about back of an ambulance, I could talk to you at home, or I could talk to you about in the operating room. And each of those, if you think of where there are challenges, if you think where there are complications, you should start thinking that AI can reduce complications, can reduce readmissions, and have such a positive impact. And at Stryker, I could talk about the possibility of AI with computer vision on endoscopy scopes, or neurovascular with strokes. But just because Invest India helped do an advertisement for robotic orthopedics, I'm going to use that as the example, and I thank her for that. So just to use an example, maybe that is very relatable. Most people know about joint replacement. Someone has arthritis, they go for a total shoulder, total hip, or a total knee. So let's just think of total knees. 10 years ago, if you had pain in your knee, you would go to a physician. And what would the physician do? Physician say, you know what, you're 60, you're 65 years old, this is the implant for you, here's the cut, here's the operating room, here's the procedure, and you were cookie cutter just like everybody else who had the surgery before you and the surgery after you. Now, AI combined with enabling tech like robotics allows us to get into personalized medicine. Everyone in here has a different knee. Everyone in here, if you went to 10 different doctors, you would probably get 10 different answers on what knee you should get or where that implant should go in you as an individual. Everybody can't be right. But physicians didn't have access to population health data. They didn't have access to be able to pull this together and get decision insights. Now, things are different. Now, I could take a CT of you, a CT scan of you, goes up to a Stryker Health Cloud, AI converts that CT into a three-dimensional model of your bone. With AI, it picks the right size of an implant, which Stryker implant is best, and then that gets fed, that plan specific to you gets fed into a robot that now drives an accurate and precision cut we could never do by hands. So the combination of AI, of tailoring where an implant goes for you, at the same time putting it in right where you demand it as an individual, that's exciting. We're seeing that today. You will expect that in spine, sports medicine, foot and ankle, shoulders, across the board. It's actually remarkable. And then the other benefit of where we're seeing impact is in product development and R&D. We're using AI to look at so many different images and designing hip implants completely different, and then maybe making custom implants specific to your anatomy. And this is all AI enabled, that is machine learning. That's just remarkable. 3 years ago, we couldn't have this conversation. We're at a point right now where we're going to make healthcare better.
Thanks, Robert. And I love the fact that you went really deep, didn't just list a set of areas, but you went really deep in describing the exact impact in one area. I think that's wonderful. Everyone can see the power of what's possible that wasn't possible without this. So thank you for that, Kala.
Well, I just want to say good morning and thanks for the chance to be here. It's a little tricky to follow Stryker as well as the amazing opening session, but we're incredibly excited about the power of AI. And when I think about the sort of call to action that I've heard from yesterday and this morning, it's all about scale, right? It's all about using this technology to scale innovation and ensure the access for everyone. And APAC Med has been just fabulous in talking about, access, capability, and trust. And this is how we're thinking about using AI. So again, clinical setting, R&D setting, supply chain manufacturing, we're using AI across the board. Just to maybe piggyback a little bit on sort of the impact on surgery, I'll share one example that we're doing, and it's around training surgeons. And again, we've had surgeons, for some would say centuries, right? But now we have the ability to train them in a very unique and innovative way using AI. So we at J&J are using AI to train surgeons around how to use our sutures, and this is applied to general surgery, laparoscopic surgery, gynecological surgery, just across the board. And so what you have is really the elevation of the skill set of the surgeons using the technology and the data, and then you've got those improved patient outcomes. And so this is, just one quick example of how when we build the capability and we really leverage it broadly, we see these really far-reaching patient impacts. I also just want to piggyback on the ecosystem conversation that we're having, because when we talk about AI and how we can use it to solve different solutions, we really do want to come together and not just have it be the big multinationals, not just have it be academia, not just have it be startups, but really how do we bring everyone together collectively? So in the context of our polyphonic digital surgery platform, which is our attempt to really kind of bring all of the different parts of the surgical ecosystem and the OR together, we have funded an AI venture fund, and we're doing it in partnership with companies like NVIDIA, with AWS, which might even be in the room right now, to fund solutions for during surgery and post-operative challenges that we're facing. So it's, again, how do we come together collectively to use the technology, to use the data, to use the investment to advance these efforts? And I think those are just a couple of quick examples for how we're really thinking about how do you harness the power and do it in a really collaborative way.
Thanks, thanks, Kala. That's very interesting. I think the idea of a venture fund, by the way, and of course a lot of companies have them now, but using it to specifically target the most promising startups that are actually bringing AI to life, I think is wonderful. I was talking to VC this morning, who was telling me about a nurse training using AI startup, which is something which, it's always, everyone's building tools for doctors, but building it for nurses, and nurses are spending $200, $300 out of pocket to actually get that training because they feel it helps them get a better job. So there's a lot of interesting things happening. So lovely to hear that example. Dr. Sujoy.
Thank you, Kush. Truly a privilege to be here. Before I start, responding to your question, can I ask the audience, how many of you are actually practicing doctors here? So I know Sandeep Wadhwasar, you are there. So I can pass off by telling some of the anecdotes here without going into much of the depth on that. In healthcare, particularly in the use of AI, and just to give you a background, for the 8 years I run 3 labs now which design, develop, and deploy clinical AI solutions within Apollo hospitals, but also across the different geographies. And the 2 things that stand out for a physician to actually use AI, one is productivity, and the second is about the outcome. And when you take productivity and outcome and look at the solutions that are coming from a perspective of how you go and design this solution from the very beginning, first of all, have them in the room. If you're building a solution for skilling nurses, have them in the room at the very first place. The second thing about this is that how you are looking at the impact and looking at it from a perspective of meeting what we call as the IHI's triple aim. Kush, we were in the same room when we started Apollo 24/7, right? About the accessibility to people, where they can go about and give a consult to a particular patient at any time across the day. And you are enabling them with a kind of a CDSS, symptom checker, at 9 p.m. at night, where you will not go about and see any doctor at any point, right? And that goes up to 6 a.m. in the morning, but you can go about it consulting in this. The other work that we have been doing now with one of the world's topmost health tech company, Solventum, was about the work that we have been doing on looking at, cardiac risk of individuals over a period of 5 years. Today we know, aided by Solventum's methodologies about the DRGs and others, that we are looking at people who go about in terms of looking at their risk potentials. They now have, even if they have an event, they have a lesser morbidity, mortality, and ventilation days. Now, these are the steps that you can do and make it ubiquitous, scale them up, go to the last mile, and not only last mile in India, but in Indonesia, in Latin America, in people in Australia, and see how effective that is. And finally, from a perspective of using generative AI in the hospital from a productivity perspective, you are looking at predicting discharges at least 24 to 48 hours before they would happen. And then how do you go about in, and all of you, maybe in our hospitals itself, you're faced it, that the discharge process takes a lot of time on the same day. How do you go about in reducing the time to prepare a simple discharge summary from something which is 4 hours with a click of a button in 2 minutes? That's the transformation that we are looking at in healthcare. That is the kind of the impact that we are looking in terms of productivity and outcome. And I'll come to the outcome in a little while.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sujoy. I think, not only have you been innovating for healthcare in India for a long time, but I know you are taking a lot of these innovations now to the rest of the world, which actually brings me to my next question. We talked about AI opportunities broadly and what's happening and how it can be so transformational for various parts of the healthcare value chain. Let's talk a little bit about India. Opportunities for using AI in MedTech in India, which are a little bit more specific to India, reducing cost, improving access, bringing consistency, quality, standardization, or personalization, right? How does that sort of impact India? And also look at the opportunity for India for creating things for the world. And I know you are doing, and of course, I'm sure others are doing, the venture funds, maybe backing players who are doing that. So maybe we get some comments on that and some ideas going a little bit from each of you from your vantage points. Again, what do you see as the opportunities either to serve India or to build things in India for the world?
Well, I'll take, you just listed a whole bunch of things, by the way, which yes, and yes. If you look at what can help, let's take a look at the hospital system right now. There's some very large hospitals in India. There's some a little bit older hospitals in India. There are rural hospitals in India. And there's also a need for nurses, a need for talented nurses. People are working harder. People want volumes increasing. How can you look at AI in the hospital environment? So when we talk about AI, and you mentioned a lot of them, but when we talk about AI, I ask that you break it up into different categories. There's AI to improve outcomes. There's AI to improve the quality of care. Think of rural areas with physicians that don't have large volumes. There's patient safety, fall detection and whatnot, so you don't have a reoperation or a readmission. That costs healthcare system money. And then economics and efficiency. So let's go to nursing efficiency and use that as an example. If you go to a lot of hospitals and you are on a certain wing in a hospital, doesn't matter how bad a situation you're in, doesn't matter how old you are, doesn't matter if you had surgery, doesn't matter, you will get visited by a nurse every single hour. You will have a cart with pharmaceuticals maybe every 2-3 hours. You will get blood pressure taken every so often. Why? Does that make any sense? That's just a protocol that's been standardized, but again, it normalizes everyone to be a single person. Now, with artificial intelligence, we can look at you, the individual, a phenotype, and say you now need this much nursing care, so maybe A nurse doesn't need to go into your room every hour. Maybe a nurse only needs to go in every 3 hours. You just help dramatically nursing efficiency, dealing with nurses overload and nursing shortage in some places. Then bringing information. So at Stryker, we have a product that helps with decision called Vocera. It's a pendant around the neck. And it provides more information to that nurse on the spot without the nurse having to go back to a cart, without the nurse having to go back to a station, without the nurse maybe having to call records downstairs. Now it's instantaneously available, and now it can also predict if this patient is in distress. Add step further, put cameras on the walls, ambient intelligence, you heard that mentioned yesterday. So ambient intelligence is essentially blurs out your face, looks at how you're getting in and out of bed, looks at if you did get out of bed, looks at if you went to the restroom, looks at did a physician come, did a nurse come, did you get a quality of care? And that all gets now part of the patient record, and based on your situation of why you're in the hospital, it will predict whether you are getting the quality of care you should be getting. So now you elevate the quality of care, you'll improve outcomes, the economic efficiency for the Indian hospitals is tremendous, and then take what works at a large volume city hospital and make a digital twin of it and replicate that now into the rural settings where you may not have as experienced or skilled a workforce, and now deliver that quality of care with AI in the form of an algorithm in decision making with information around someone's neck on the spot. This is all able with population health data, and now looking at specifically addressing an issue that we have in the quality of healthcare and the cost of healthcare, and addressing it with data.
Thanks, Robert. By the way, that framework is very helpful, which is because it's great because it's impact back, right? So we can think about innovations not just as a broad category, but innovations specifically for outcomes, quality of care, patient experience, or economics. And of course, there are some innovations which address multiple of those, and those are maybe the most powerful ones. And I love that framing and the fact that how applicable these are in India. We love in India to look for leapfrog opportunities, right? And so some of these ideas can just be taken and plugged in, and you suddenly see the most modern thing. Apollo 24/7, which you talked about, Dr. Sujay, I think was a leapfrog at that time. Continues to be, I think, probably the highest quality care digital health ecosystem. And so these kinds of things have been created here, and I think we love this kind of innovation. Kala, your ideas, thoughts?
Well, I'll hone in on how we're using AI to impact the standard of care in India today. So J&J MedTech India is working with QAI to address lung cancer, and I'm sure this audience knows, this is the #1 killer globally. There are over 1.8 million deaths annually in lung cancer, so really tremendous need. And we're using AI to identify potential nodules and problems that are missed by CT scans and x-rays. So again, you have a standard of care that isn't fully effective, and we're using AI to elevate that. We're also working in India to advance ITN clinics so that we're providing access to that for screening and greater, diagnostics around lung cancer to improve, again, the standard of care. And this is happening both, in your large, really sophisticated hospitals here in India, but also in the rural settings. And so I think, using AI within a market like this to really advance the standard of care for everyone, that's the objective. And I can't be here and not mention, and I think it came up earlier today, Ashram Bharat and the digitalization of over 500 million patient records. I mean, that's the kind of power that India is bringing to this conversation, and so we're incredibly excited to work with those data sets, using federated data to really discern various learnings that we can then adopt across the board. And so, the scale of the population, the scale of the healthcare need, and then the focus on what are those, enablers that people within India are really open and looking to do. That's what we want to take advantage of and leverage. And so today it's lung cancer, #1 killer, but we're going to keep advancing that in other domains.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think it also highlights the point that you mentioned that we have so many data points. When we get organized, we're actually pretty good at digitizing things. You combine those things and you can, models need data for training, and we just have a lot of data points. And even if you set up a new model and start training it today, and just on new data points, you can actually in 6 months have a lot of information in it, unlike anywhere else, I think in the world, which just the sheer pace at which you can get data in is actually quite unique. So that then obviously begs the opportunity that if we can use it for patients in India and for health systems in India, can we actually develop tools for the rest of the world? And I know, Dr. Suya, you're doing that, so maybe talk about both things, but focus on the building in India for the world.
Thank you, Kush. Of course, we want to build in India. We want to co-develop. I have heard about, a lot of things that we want to use the C word and do co-development, co-creation, and all of that. But I want to use 4 C words again, and this is a certain counterpunch to MedTech industry from a physician's perspective. And I'll tell you what I'm worried about. One is, of course, the capability. And the tech capability around Indian hospitals or Indian healthcare ecosystem, primary healthcare, secondary healthcare, tertiary healthcare, whichever you look, we really need to set the house right. If we do not do it now, we are going to miss the opportunity around this. So the first thing is the hygiene about how you bring the way by which you bring your tech capability around, EMR systems or digital health systems appropriate in that context. The second C is about compute. And compute, for all practical purpose, is evasive for most of the organizations or healthcare systems, public or private, in India. How do we make compute more available to people so that they can go about in using some of these models in a proper way? The other part of the compute is this, that when we are doing this on ground in the hospital, what is that you have in terms of your data structures? What are the kind of data that flows from the patient-related data that goes into the MedTech, that doesn't go into the EMR? Where does that data reside? And how the fiduciary requirements from a provider or a physician then plays out. It's again very important that we address those issues going forward. The third is about cognition. And I think I'm going to make my most interesting point around the cognition. I don't know about how many of you have been following this, but in one of the Lancet report that came up about 2 weeks and created a buzz in the community, said that, when you are doing endoscopies and, you are picking up some of the adenomas, which could be cancerous in future, before they were using the AI tools, the physicians would detect it at 26%. After the use of AI tool, physician plus AI are now detecting it only about 22%. And that's a very important component, that is AI plus physician then not better than either the AI or the physician? And there are numbers of publications that are coming out now which actually goes about in understanding whether we are designing our AI tools appropriately or not, and particularly in terms of how you are developing your CDSS. I earn my bread by developing CDSS, and I think I'm doing wrong. And there is a transition that is happening around this, that you need to move now from clinical decision support system embedded into your devices to intelligent choice architectures, ICAs. And what ICAs actually does is that it does not tell the physician what to do next, but it gives an options or choice, or what we call as the high-value alternatives, to actually then go about with their reasoning that if you take this choice, the chance of detecting a cancer is this. And why I talked about it in terms of cognition is that because of the factor that if you don't pick up, the feedback loop then goes and tells you over a period of time to evade it, and you then have a system which is, going into obsolescence. The third part is, the fourth part is, or the fourth C is about collaborative. And I think one of the way, whether you take it in confidential computing or federated learning or whichever way, you have to collaborate if you want to do AI across the world. You have to build some sort of consensus algorithms with their local needs amplified. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Sujay. You've kind of helped us segue already into challenges. So that's very helpful. So let's talk a little bit about challenges. I think specifically challenges in India. So the opportunity is great. I think we all agreed on that. We've talked about the opportunity for various kinds of impact, particularly in outcomes, but also in patient experience, economic impact, etc. We've talked about different kinds of ways in which that's going to happen, whether it's on the robotic side or whether it's with clinical decision support, training systems, and obviously that's just the tip of the iceberg. There are a whole multitude of opportunities. What are the kinds of challenges that we're going to face, either in developing solutions or in driving adoption of them, or any other that you are already seeing and that you foresee, and again, global as well as in India?
I'm a firm believer. If you give economic advantage to a hospital, your adoption will be really fast. If you give outcome improvement that's appreciable and not necessarily an added cost, you will get adoption quickly. I think when we talk about this, and let's just talk about the challenge, and then I'll give you an efficiency example, and I'll give you an outcome example. And I had this discussion with the APAC Med people, I've had discussion with the AVIMed people, and so for those of you involved with it, the biggest challenge right now in India is patient data and data access. I could tell you, we could talk about AI policy with the government if we want, we could talk about reimbursement if we want. You know what, those are all great, but unless you have AI product that's built in a responsible way without bias and has true population and the full population represented, the rest of it does not matter. And right now it is very hard to get access at a lot of these hospitals, or the hospitals don't have it. So for example, sometimes they'll have what goes on with the patient in the operating room, but they won't necessarily be fully recording the time of the procedure. Or let's take this total knee example. A total knee example, which I showed before, right? I know what you look like preoperatively. I get a CT scan, I can get your electronic health records. I know what happens in the operating room with you. There's Stryker equipment I could pull data from. How many physicians follow, you think, a total knee patient 3 months or 6 months after surgery? You know, you only find out about the patient if they got readmitted or had to have a reoperation. That's bad. You don't know if that patient is happy at home. You actually don't know if that person can walk up and down stairs. You don't know how that person is getting out of a car. We're talking about quality of life. But because the follow-up period is so short here, we actually don't know for that specific type of individual what has happened afterwards. So now let's take that data. I want for all Stryker procedures, Stryker equipment procedures, or for any MedTech company, by the way, we should be helping out with operating room efficiency. If we could predict for that patient's complexity of a surgical procedure and the hospital's experience and the physician's experience, we should be able to predict the time of that operation. Then we could help the perioperative staff case level load their operating rooms for the whole day. And potentially they could get one more case per day out of each operating room. That's a better use of resources, fixed overhead, and that's revenue coming in with greater volume without stressing the system. But the data's just not there to take a hard line on it. Now on patient outcomes, should I be able to predict if you are a BMI of 39, 72-year-old diabetic female, and you're walking around like in a lot of India, where you wait too long for your total knee prosthesis until your deformity of your leg is to a great extent, I should be able to predict what your outcomes and what success looks like for you. But we don't have the data after those patients go home. We don't understand the complications, and we don't understand how they are doing relative to quality of life. We only know if they had to come back for a reoperation. We are in the world with AI now. It's about quality of life. It's about people feeling good about what they do. So that data stream doesn't exist right now. We've been talking to some of the large volume hospitals. I'm now following the continuum of care of certain endoscopy procedures, of certain MIS procedures, and orthopedic procedures. If we can get that data, we will be able to rapidly advance in remarkable ways.
That's a really powerful idea, Robert. And actually, you know, a lot of the work that I do actually with companies both in healthcare and outside, but a lot in sort of financial services, for instance, is to make things easy for people to stay connected before, after transactions. And this challenge we've been dealing with for a long time, right? How do you stay connected with people before and after? And it's not like it's been cracked outside India as well. So, but yeah, we do. And it's, you know, you can, with AI, you can actually do this in a very humanoid manner on WhatsApp, on a call, and it doesn't require, it's not very high cost. So I think the challenge
you
is
could
for
also
us,
have cameras in a home,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And home healthcare and sensors. It's just remarkable what you can do.
Absolutely. So depending on, you know, how much people are willing to spend, there's all kinds of solutions possible to do this. The challenge is actually for the industry to create those solutions that are easy, easy to adopt, because the tech is there. The tech seems to be there at least. I don't know, Dr. Sujay, you have been dealing with some of this as well.
So I just wanted to respond to what Rob, you just talked about. Let's talk. We haven't talked much. And if you are looking at longitudinal temporal data with outcomes, particularly whether you are looking at it from an endoscopy or a TKR surgery, or for that matter, any other procedure that you are doing through your equipment and AI systems, we'll be more than happy to provide you with that data.
Sold.
Maybe I'll jump in on some of the broader policy challenges. And I think many of these are true for India and globally, but specifically in India. You can't not address the digital divide. I mean, that's a real situation, and I think, you know, when we talk about rural hospitals, these large, sophisticated hospitals, you have that across the board. We also have to address digital literacy. I think it relates to some of the things that you're discussing in terms of even physicians and uptake and how they're taking advantage of technologies and things like that. So that's something that's real for the patient in terms of their own trust and understanding and being able to access technologies that will help them with their pre-surgical planning and things like that, information for caregivers, but also for the healthcare providers. And then I think around the data, I mean, I love this conversation that we're having, but if you don't have comprehensive privacy laws, if you don't have standardized data sets, if you don't have the interoperability built into the standards in a collective, collaborative way that everyone has signed on to, so that the hospitals can make it work, so that the technology developers know what standards they're adhering to, so that everyone can agree we're going to have it structured in a certain way, then you really can't advance these kinds of solutions. So I think there are some really fundamental policy enablers that relate to the access, the trust, the uptake around all of these issues. You know, we can talk about reimbursement ad nauseum, but even on the regulatory side, and I think this goes back to what you're saying about, you know, there's going to be a transition, right? Clinical decision software to whatever is next. We need flexible regulatory approaches so that we can get these innovations and enhancements incorporated into the next iteration of the products. And so that's why we advocate through AdvaMed and APACMed for things like regulatory sandboxes, predetermined change protocol plans, so that we can continue to adopt these new innovations and get them on the market safely and ethically. So just wanted to kind of underscore that I think while we have the technology, if we don't have the infrastructure on the policy side, we still continue to have issues having things adopted. And the last one I'll mention is just IP. It's a reality, and we need consistent and predictable IP laws and understanding of how they'll be applied, especially as we have the ability to take more insights from the data.
Okay, lovely.
Yeah. So Kush, if you have to ask me about, you know, what are the challenges that we face, and I'm just, you know, shifting my role from a physician to somebody who is building tech in terms of software as medical device, and I don't know how many of us sitting here are startups. The biggest problem that we have today is actually regulatory. And the kind of thing that we have in regulatory, you know, I've done regulatory submissions for medical device for US FDA, Australian TGA, Canadian Health, CE, and all of that. In most cases, particularly for software as medical device, particularly for device classifications of class 2 or class 2A, 2B, you would not see much of a difference between each one of these regulators. But the process itself is so tenuous and so arduous that most of the startups today in India would not venture that path. And what is that we could possibly do to help them is a fundamental requirement before we start building it from India. If we have not calibrated that path where Indian startups can go about and have an accelerated pathway, I was seeing in Ms. Nivriti's slides about what Microsoft does and all of that, but we need to find a path where we would have access to the data from the other countries, accelerated pathways to actually go and validate algorithms, get the certification and do this. And I have to say this, that there are now dynamic countries in Southeast Asia, possibly in Latin America, even China, who are moving faster than many of the countries that I have named here.
And I just want to jump and respond that there's a real opportunity to have regulatory leapfrogging. Yes. That you don't have to adhere to the systems of a Health Canada or a US FDA, but you really can leapfrog in terms of how you're looking at these regulatory pathways and submissions. And then I have to make a plug for harmonization.
Yes.
I think we have a little under 3 minutes. So I already had a chance to summarize earlier, so I'm not going to play back everything that we just discussed. But I want to have one final question. If you could be anyone you wanted to be, and your goal was to try and accelerate the adoption of this beautiful new technology, personalized medicine, decision support, training, all the things that we talked about, given all the challenges, what's the one thing that you'd like to do, or any other comment, but I'd love to hear the one thing that you would do that you think would make the biggest difference.
I'm an R&D guy at heart. I know, right, and we are very early in this AI journey, and I know that in procedures that Stryker equipment participates in the operating room, I actually am sitting here knowing where AI can help. I know where AI can make a real difference to reduce complications, improve outcomes, and the quality of care. And to answer your question then, we should be able to talk about those use cases and the potential of it and education awareness at the government level, at hospital administrator level. We should increase the adoption. If people understood the benefit that is tangible and is soon, this is not aspirational, I think the adoption and I think policy, and we would hear lawmakers get into very, very different discussions, as I think we have an industry have to take on the burden to help with that educational process.
Excellent, excellent. Hello?
So I'm going to take this opportunity to name myself World Data Czar, because I think it's really about the data. And we haven't gotten into anything really geopolitical in this conversation, but data sovereignty, data localization, that is not helping patients, that is not helping innovation. And so we really do have to address these issues around cross-border data flows. But we also have real issues with even data flows within hospitals, right? Data flows within states, within countries. And so if we can get countries, policymakers, everyone to understand the power of the data for the collective good. Someone mentioned COVID, right? Like, think about what we were able to do when we shared data to address this major worldwide health crisis. So I think my top choice would be to really address these data issues and then use that data to enable the AI and the patient improvements we're looking for.
Thank you. That would require a powerful magic wand.
My one word for this is upskill. It's very important that you go about, particularly from adoption perspective, look at your physicians, look at your nurses, look at your other clinicians to upskill. For any MedTech that you would use in a hospital, you would skill the person, you would do a competency assessment and allow him the privileges to do this. I would say use AI to put people and provide them into privileges to use AI. That's it.
Love that. So both of you have actually talked about awareness and education, right? And I think the data barriers are equally important. So very powerful points there. I can see this red and white time's up message. So that's usually a good signal for us to stop. But thank you very much for those insights. I hope it's been helpful for the audience. But I've learned a lot, and I've made some notes which I'm going to try and summarize and play back. But I think there's a lot of powerful ideas there, and I think your ending wishes were sort of they show where your hearts are at. So thank you very much for that, and thank you for sharing that.